The crystal palace stretched high above the cliffs, its towers glinting under the twin suns. Inside, halls were cold and silent, polished floors reflecting the light like glass. At the center of the palace, on a throne carved from black stone and gold, sat the Dragon Emperor. His scales were dark and glossy, his eyes sharp and golden. Every visitor who entered felt the weight of his gaze, heavy and unyielding. No one dared approach him with gifts. None had for decades. The Emperor believed that gifts were distractions, meant to weaken resolve or beg for favor. Diplomats from distant worlds trembled when they spoke to him. Soldiers and guards bowed, careful not to breathe too loudly. Even the palace servants moved quickly and silently, fearing the slightest misstep. The Emperor's hatchlings huddled in the nursery wing, wings folded tightly. They were young, curious and brave, yet even they felt the chill of their father's presence. The youngest, a small dragon with scales that shimmered like molten silver, peered out at the throne from the safety of the nursery. Its golden eyes reflected a mixture of awe and sadness. It had been told stories about its father, about his strength, his fearlessness, his unapproachable nature. But seeing him up close, the hatchling felt something else: loneliness. On the lower levels of the palace, a small human boy swept the floors. He was the son of the palace janitor, quiet and unnoticed. While others rushed past with fear or purpose, he moved calmly, brushing away dust and debris. He had grown up in the palace, learning to read its rhythms, its silences and the moods of the dragons. Most importantly, he had learned to observe. The Emperor's presence, so cold and commanding, fascinated him. He noticed small movements, the slight tilt of a claw, the way the Emperor's eyes followed a visitor, the tension in his shoulders. The boy's name was Terran. He had no armor, no rank, no weapon. No one paid him much attention, and that was exactly how he liked it. He had learned that in this palace, invisibility could be a shield. As he swept the floors near the grand hall, he glanced toward the throne. The Emperor sat there, wings folded around him like a dark cloak, surveying the court. His eyes fell on Terran for a brief moment. The boy froze but did not bow. He only held the broom carefully, keeping his distance. The Emperor's gaze was sharp, but it did not burn. Instead, it measured. He noticed small things: Terran's careful steps, the gentle way he treated the polished floors, the lack of fear in his posture. He had not seen this before. Visitors always trembled. Soldiers always flinched. But the boy was quiet, and he moved with purpose without seeking attention. That small observation stirred something the Emperor rarely felt: curiosity. Meanwhile, the youngest hatchling crept closer to the edge of the nursery. Its small claws clicked softly on the polished floor. It had watched Terran for days, unseen by the boy, unseen by the palace. Something about him was different. He was not a threat. He was not loud or demanding. He simply existed without fear. The hatchling flapped its tiny wings experimentally, then padded closer, keeping just enough distance to remain safe. The palace doors opened with a low hum, and a delegation from a neighboring system entered. They carried formal gifts wrapped in golden fabrics and crystalline containers. Their leaders bowed deeply and presented the offerings to the Emperor, their hands shaking. Some of the gifts were valuable, others rare, all meant to impress or curry favor. The Emperor did not move. He watched the gifts, then the diplomats. He extended one claw slowly, examined a crystal, and set it aside without comment. His expression was unchanged. No words of thanks. No approval. Silence reigned. The visitors stiffened. Fear rose in the room. No one dared breathe too loudly. The young hatchling tilted its head, curious. This was what Terran had told it: the Emperor never accepted gifts. He was untouchable, unshakable, unyielding. Terran continued his work near the edges of the hall, invisible to most eyes. He swept quietly, observing the Emperor's reactions, noting how even powerful beings had patterns, small tells, and movements that revealed more than words ever could. He had no idea why he felt drawn to the Emperor, or why he wanted to understand him. He only knew that something inside him stirred when he watched the great dragon, and he could not look away. The Emperor finally rose from his throne. His wings extended slowly, filling the hall with shadow. Every visitor and servant felt the shift immediately. The ground seemed to tremble under his weight, though his steps were measured and deliberate. He did not speak. He did not roar. He simply walked toward the windows, gazing out at the city and the cliffs beyond. The hatchling followed him with its eyes, flapping its tiny wings nervously. Terran stopped sweeping, feeling the tension in the hall. He did not move. He did not speak. Somehow he knew this moment was not just about power or fear. Something subtle, something fragile was in the air. The Emperor turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of the small boy near the corner. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. The Emperor's gaze, so often cold and commanding, softened ever so slightly, not in friendliness, not in warmth, but in recognition. The boy did not flinch. He only held the broom steadily, acknowledging the Emperor's presence without bowing, without fear. The hatchling chirped softly, testing the silence. The Emperor's attention shifted, watching both of them. It was a rare moment, a crack in the armor of legend. No one in the court dared move. Every officer, diplomat, and servant sensed it, the unspoken truth that the Emperor's heart, though hidden beneath layers of authority and pride, could be reached. And for the first time in many years, the Emperor's court, once cold and untouchable, held a quiet possibility, that even a dragon emperor could notice kindness, curiosity, and courage in the smallest of observers. From across the room, Terran continued to sweep, unaware of how close he had come to changing everything. The hatchling watched the boy. The Emperor watched them both. And in that silent, tense hall, the first spark of something extraordinary began to stir. The palace was quiet after the morning court session. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, creating patterns of gold on the polished floors. The Dragon Emperor had returned to his private chambers, wings folded, eyes closed. Even the servants and soldiers gave him space, moving in hushed steps. Terran, the human janitor's son, walked slowly down the corridor. He carried his broom and a small bucket of cleaning water. He had finished sweeping the grand hall and now moved to the smaller rooms near the nursery wing. Most people avoided this area, it was too close to the Emperor's private chambers. But Terran liked it. The hatchlings were here, small dragons full of curiosity and wonder. They fascinated him. The youngest hatchling, the silver-scaled one, was awake and moving about its pen. It chirped softly, testing the silence, then noticed Terran standing quietly near the corner. The boy did not flinch. He simply looked at the hatchling with wide, honest eyes. The hatchling padded closer, its claws making small clicking sounds on the stone floor. Terran knelt down, keeping his hands open and steady. "Hello," he whispered. The hatchling cocked its head, unsure what to make of the human. No one had ever spoken to it this way before. No one had ever approached without fear, without a plan to control or command. For the first time, the hatchling felt safe enough to step forward. It sniffed at Terran's hand, tiny wings twitching with excitement. Terran smiled softly and extended a small scrap of cloth he had found in the cleaning room. It was clean, soft, and carried the scent of warmth. The hatchling sniffed it and nudged it gently with its nose. Terran laughed quietly. "You like that, don't you?" he said. He had learned that small gestures mattered even for dragons. Nothing flashy, nothing demanding, just attention, care, and patience. The hatchling chirped again, a sound that seemed like approval. From the corner of the room, a slightly larger hatchling watched silently. It had silver-gray scales, darker than its younger sibling. It flapped its wings slowly, curious but cautious. The Emperor's older hatchlings were taught to fear humans, but this human, this boy, was different. There was no fear in his movements, no desire to dominate. Terran noticed the larger hatchling watching and spoke softly. "It's okay," he said. "I won't hurt you." The dragon hesitated, then took a cautious step closer. Trust, Terran had learned, came slowly, one step at a time. Over the next few days, the boy and the hatchling spent time together. Terran would bring scraps of soft fabric, small toys made from leftover metal, and even little puzzles he created from old tools. The hatchling explored each item with curiosity, learning, testing, and discovering. Terran guided it gently, never forcing, never rushing. The Emperor noticed. From his high chamber, he observed the pair without being seen. His golden eyes followed every interaction. For decades, he had refused gifts, refused gestures, refused the small joys that humans or dragons might offer. And yet, here was a boy, quiet and careful, teaching a hatchling without any desire for power or reward. Something stirred inside the Emperor, something he had not felt in centuries. One afternoon, Terran noticed a small pile of broken toys near the hatchling's pen. He picked up the pieces, examining them. "We can fix this," he said, even though the hatchling did not understand words. It chirped softly, nudging a broken gear. Terran smiled. "See? We just need a little patience." He worked carefully, assembling the pieces with his small hands. The hatchling watched, fascinated by the human's skill and care. The Emperor's curiosity grew. He leaned closer to the balcony railing, unseen, and studied the boy. No one else had ever approached dragons with such gentleness. No one had ever been able to calm the creatures without fear. And yet this boy did it effortlessly. The bond between the boy and hatchling deepened. They discovered small games, tossing soft scraps, guiding the hatchling through simple mazes, and even teaching it to respond to gestures. Each interaction was small, quiet, but powerful. The hatchling learned trust. Terran learned patience. And the Emperor watched, fascinated by the growing connection. One evening, Terran stayed late, cleaning the nursery floor while the hatchling rested. He noticed the small dragon's scales reflected the setting sun, glowing softly. He reached out gently, letting his fingers hover just above its head. The hatchling leaned slightly into his hand, a tiny gesture of acceptance. Terran smiled. "You're brave," he whispered. "And smart." The hatchling chirped again as if agreeing. The Emperor's eye narrowed thoughtfully. He had never seen this before. No fear, no demand, only mutual understanding. For centuries he had ruled through strength and intimidation, expecting respect through fear. And yet, here was a boy, small and unnoticed, reaching what he could not. The next day, Terran brought a small creation made from leftover scraps of metal and crystal. He showed it to the hatchling and they explored it together. It was a simple toy, nothing valuable, nothing grand, but it was made with care. The hatchling nudged it, pawed at it, and chirped happily. The Emperor observed silently. That small act, so humble and patient, struck him. Perhaps power did not have to be cold. Perhaps strength was not only in scales and claws, in authority and fear. Perhaps there was something else, something he had forgotten over the centuries. From that moment, the unlikely pair, the human boy and the hatchling, continued their quiet work, slowly building trust, curiosity, and understanding. They did not speak in words, yet their gestures spoke volumes. And somewhere above them, unseen but watching, the Dragon Emperor felt the faint stirrings of an emotion he had not known in ages: hope. He had never accepted gifts, he had never welcomed attention, and he had never allowed himself to feel connection. But perhaps, through the small acts of a boy and a hatchling, that could begin to change. The palace, once cold and unyielding, held its breath. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it carried the possibility of warmth. The palace was quiet again, but the air felt different. A soft light filtered through the crystal windows, reflecting off the polished floors and filling the hall with warmth. The Dragon Emperor sat on his throne as usual, wings folded around him, his golden eyes sharp and commanding. Yet today, his gaze lingered on the nursery wing, where a small silver hatchling moved about curiously. Terran, the janitor's son, tiptoed quietly along the hallway, carrying a small bundle he had prepared. He had been observing the Emperor from afar, watching for moments when the great dragon's attention wandered. Today he felt ready. Today he wanted to try something daring. The hatchling chirped softly, sensing Terran's presence. It hopped closer to the bundle, nudging it with its tiny snout. Inside were simple items: scraps of colorful cloth, smooth stones, and a small wooden puzzle Terran had made from leftover materials. They were not valuable or grand. But they carried thought and care, things the Emperor had long refused to accept. Terran placed the bundle on the floor gently. The hatchling sniffed, pawed at it, and chirped again, excited. "It's okay," Terran whispered. "This is for you." He did not ask permission, he did not command. He only offered. The Emperor's eye flicked toward the hatchling and boy. His scales shimmered in the light, and the usual aura of unapproachable authority surrounded him. Everyone in the court expected the Emperor to react with anger, or at the very least, dismissal. He had never tolerated gifts, never allowed gestures of care, never let anyone approach without fear. Fire had always been the answer. Terran knelt down carefully, a few steps closer to the hatchling, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The young dragon sniffed the wooden puzzle and pushed it with its nose. Terran reached out a hand, steady and calm, letting the hatchling nudge his fingers without fear. A low murmur passed through the palace guards and servants. "Is he really doing that?" one whispered. "The Emperor will not allow it," another replied. But the Emperor did not move. He only observed. The hatchling chirped happily and nudged Terran again. The boy smiled and gently guided it to the colorful cloth, letting it explore the soft textures. This small act, so simple, was powerful in a palace that had never known gentleness. The Emperor's eye narrowed, not with anger but curiosity. He had watched the boy for days, and the patience, care, and calmness were unlike anything he had encountered. The Emperor remembered the moments before power had hardened him. Long ago, when dragons were free to feel and choose without fear of duty. He had forgotten those times. But now, as he watched the boy and hatchling, something stirred deep inside. Terran reached into the bundle and pulled out a small, smooth stone. He held it out for the hatchling to examine. The young dragon sniffed and tapped it with its paw. Terran whispered, "See? Just a small stone, but it can be fun." The hatchling chirped and nudged the stone again, batting it around. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. He did not speak, did not move, but his attention was fully on the pair. He had never allowed anyone to approach him with kindness. He had never let his hatchling see such simple care from a human. And yet he could not look away. Terran moved slowly closer to the Emperor's observation balcony, keeping the hatchling in sight. He wanted the Emperor to see the gesture, not as a command, not as flattery, but as a sincere offering. He placed the stone carefully in front of the hatchling, then stepped back, hands visible and open. The hatchling pawed at the stone again and nudged Terran gently, chirping as if encouraging him. The boy smiled, whispering softly, "Good job, little one. You're learning." The hatchling chirped in response, flapping its tiny wings with excitement. The Emperor's golden eyes glimmered as he watched. He could sense something unusual: trust. He had seen obedience, fear, and respect earned through power, but never this. The hatchling had no reason to obey the boy, yet it followed, explored, and responded. The boy demanded nothing, yet the hatchling offered attention freely. A soft exhale left the Emperor's nostrils. The air in the hall seemed to shift. The court, sensing the change, remained still. No one dared interrupt, no one moved too quickly. The expectation of fire, of authority asserted, was gone. Terran reached into his bundle one more time and held up a small wooden puzzle. It was simple, a tiny maze with a ball he had carved from leftover material. He placed it on the floor, letting the hatchling explore it. The dragon pawed the ball and batted it along the maze, chirping with delight. The Emperor's eye softened slightly. He had seen countless gifts, offerings, and tributes in his lifetime. All had been meant to gain favor, all had been met with strict evaluation and judgment. But this was different. It carried no demand, no ambition, no fear. Only thoughtfulness, only patience, only kindness. Terran knelt quietly, keeping his movements slow, allowing the hatchling to lead. The dragon learned, explored, and trusted. Each chirp and paw movement reinforced the human's patience. Each act of care, no matter how small, was a message that even those who seemed untouchable could be approached with gentleness. The Emperor leaned back on his throne. He did not roar, he did not move. He did not punish. He watched. And in watching, he began to understand something he had long forgotten: that power was not only measured in strength or fear, but also in the courage to accept kindness, even when it seemed unnecessary. The hatchling nudged Terran's hand one final time before curling up beside the stone puzzle. Terran smiled and whispered, "Good job. You're safe now." He stood slowly, keeping his hands open and calm. The Emperor's eye lingered on the boy. He had expected insolence, distraction, or failure. He had expected disruption or disrespect. But what he had witnessed was something far stronger. A quiet courage. A gesture of trust. A simple kindness that carried more weight than all the treasures and tributes ever presented to him. For the first time in many years, the Emperor considered that there might be another way to connect, another way to lead, another way to teach and protect without demanding fear in return. The hall remained silent. The palace servants and guards dared not breathe too loudly. And the boy and hatchling, unaware of the Emperor's inner thoughts, continued their small, gentle play. In that quiet, sunlit hall, something extraordinary happened. Where everyone had expected fire, anger, or authority asserted, they saw something entirely new: trust, patience, and kindness. And for the first time, the Dragon Emperor realized that even the untouchable could be reached, if someone was brave enough to show care where fear had always been expected. The palace was quieter than usual that morning. Sunlight poured through the tall crystal windows, painting the polished floors in gold. The Dragon Emperor sat on his black and gold throne, wings folded, eyes fixed on the nursery wing. His hatchlings moved about, chirping and flapping, but his attention was elsewhere. It rested on Terran, the human janitor's son, and the youngest silver hatchling. Terran carried a small bundle carefully. He had been preparing it for days. Inside were tiny scraps of cloth, smooth stones, and a small wooden puzzle he had created from leftover materials. It was simple, almost childish, but it carried thought, care, and patience. The boy did not approach recklessly. He stepped slowly, giving the hatchling space while making sure the Emperor could see. The hatchling chirped and pawed at the bundle eagerly. It nudged the cloth and tapped the puzzle with its tiny snout, exploring each item. Terran smiled softly and whispered, "It's okay, little one. You can try it." His voice was calm, steady, unafraid. The Emperor's eye narrowed as he observed. He had never tolerated gifts before. He had refused them from kings, diplomats, and even other dragons. To him, gifts were symbols of weakness, distractions, or attempts to manipulate. And yet, here was a human, small and unnoticed, offering something with no demand, no fear, no hidden agenda. Terran reached out a hand, letting the hatchling paw at it gently. The young dragon leaned into the touch, chirping softly. Terran did not flinch. He did not command. He simply let the hatchling guide the interaction. A low murmur ran through the court. Soldiers, servants, and diplomats watched silently. No one dared approach or speak. Everyone expected the Emperor to react, to roar, to assert authority. They had prepared for anger, fire, and punishment. But the Emperor remained still, studying the boy and hatchling with a sharp, unreadable expression. The boy lifted a small stone and placed it carefully beside the hatchling. It pawed at it again and batted it across the floor. Terran laughed softly. "See? You can move it around." The hatchling chirped in response, tail flicking excitedly. The Emperor's attention did not waver. His mind, however, shifted. For centuries he had ruled through strength and fear. Gifts were meaningless to him because he believed no one could reach his heart. And yet, this small act, simple and unassuming, carried more meaning than any offering he had ever received. The boy's patience, his courage, his care, all combined into a gesture stronger than the roar of any army or the fire of any dragon. He remembered the past. Times before his rule hardened him, when he had been young and curious, before power demanded detachment. He had been offered gifts then, small tokens of respect or kindness, but he had refused them. He had chosen duty over feeling. But watching Terran and the hatchling, he realized something important. Strength could coexist with kindness. Authority did not require fear. Respect could be earned without threat. The Emperor slowly rose from his throne. His wings stretched, casting long shadows across the hall. The court tensed, expecting an outburst. But he did not roar. He did not attack. He simply walked toward the balcony overlooking the nursery, golden eyes fixed on the boy and hatchling. Terran froze, unsure if he had done something wrong. The hatchling chirped nervously, sensing tension. But the Emperor did not advance further. Instead, he stopped and lowered his massive head slightly, golden eyes studying them both. The Emperor's voice rumbled quietly, deep but calm. "Bring it closer." The word surprised everyone. Terran blinked. He had not expected the Emperor to speak, let alone invite him closer. The boy nodded and stepped forward carefully, carrying the bundle. The hatchling followed. The Emperor studied the bundle as Terran placed it gently on the floor. He examined the wooden puzzle, the smooth stones, the soft scraps of cloth. There was no fear here, no attempt to impress, no hidden meaning, only care. He lowered his claw slowly and touched the edge of the puzzle just once to feel its texture. A hush fell over the hall. The Emperor had never touched anything offered to him in centuries. Diplomats, soldiers, even other dragons had presented treasures, but he had always refused. And now, for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the thought behind a gift, not the value of it. The hatchling nudged Terran's hand and then the bundle again. Terran smiled softly and whispered, "It's okay. You can explore it as you like." The Emperor watched, noting how the boy's patience and gentleness guided the dragon's actions without command. He realized that this small, simple act carried something powerful. It was trust. The boy trusted the hatchling. The hatchling trusted the boy. And for a moment the Emperor felt that he could be trusted too. For centuries he had been untouchable, unshakable, and feared by all. He had believed that accepting gifts or gestures of care would weaken him. But now he understood that true strength was not in refusing, not in fear, but in choosing to allow connection. He lowered his massive head further and released a soft, rumbling sound. It was not a roar of warning. It was a sound of acknowledgement, of acceptance. The hatchling chirped in response, nudging the Emperor's claw carefully. Terran held his breath, unsure if he had crossed a line, but he did not move. The Emperor's eye softened, golden scales shimmering in the sunlight. He allowed the hatchling to explore the puzzle freely, nudging it with his claw gently at times. No fire, no punishment, only quiet observation. The court watched in awe. Where they expected anger or destruction, they saw patience, understanding, and a choice to accept. They saw the untouchable Emperor open even just a little to kindness. Terran smiled softly, relieved. The hatchling chirped happily. And the Emperor realized something he had long forgotten. He was not alone. Strength did not mean isolation. Power did not mean fear. Trust and care could exist alongside authority, and they could be far stronger than any display of fire. From that moment, the Emperor made a choice. He would no longer refuse the small gestures, the simple acts of care. He would observe, he would allow, he would consider that even the smallest kindness could reach him. The untouchable could be touched, not by force but by thoughtfulness and courage. The palace, once cold and silent, felt warmer. The hatchlings chirped and flapped. Terran stood quietly, feeling the weight of what had just happened, knowing that he had done something extraordinary without realizing it. And the Dragon Emperor, feared across worlds for centuries, had made a choice that would begin to change everything. Weeks passed and the palace felt different. The sunlight reflected off the crystal walls with warmth rather than cold brightness. The Dragon Emperor had returned to his throne many times, but now his eyes lingered on more than just orders and duty. He watched his hatchlings play, watched Terran quietly tending the floors or sitting near the nursery, and something within him shifted. The smallest hatchling, the silver one, had grown bolder. It moved through the halls without fear, chirping and exploring, sometimes nudging Terran's hand or curling beside him while he worked. Terran had become more than a janitor's son in the Emperor's eyes. He was a guide for the hatchlings, a teacher of patience, and an example of courage without arrogance. The Emperor noticed these small things, each moment adding to a growing understanding of trust. Other dragons and humans began to notice changes too. The court, once rigid with fear and protocol, softened. Soldiers walked with less tension. Servants no longer moved as if shadows of themselves. Even the older hatchlings observed Terran and the youngest dragon, learning how calm gestures could communicate more than commands ever had. The Emperor allowed this quietly, watching as understanding began to spread. One morning, a delegation from a distant world arrived. They carried their customary gifts, hoping to impress the Emperor and his court. Terran, sweeping the hall nearby, paused to watch. The Emperor's eyes followed the delegation and then, surprisingly, he gestured with one massive claw. Not in anger or dismissal but toward the gifts. One by one, the Emperor allowed his hatchlings to examine them, let Terran touch the items and guide the young dragons. The court held its breath, expecting tension, but none came. The delegation, confused at first, slowly realized that the Emperor had changed. He accepted the gifts not for their value, but for what they represented. A connection, a moment of thoughtfulness, a gesture meant to build trust. The delegation relaxed, understanding that the Emperor now measured strength differently. They began to present their offerings with care, without fear, and the court followed their example. The Emperor spent more time with Terran and the hatchlings each day. They explored the palace quietly, discovering spaces that had once been off-limits. Terran taught the hatchlings to solve small puzzles, to explore patterns, to notice details in the palace architecture. The dragons responded with curiosity, learning to trust one another as well as humans. The Emperor observed silently, sometimes joining in by nudging an object or showing a small gesture of attention, a sign of his growing understanding. Word spread across human settlements and dragon territories alike. Stories circulated about the Dragon Emperor who once accepted nothing, now allowing gestures of care and thoughtfulness into his halls. Leaders from other planets and dragon elders took note. They realized that strength was no longer measured only in fear, fire, or power, but in the ability to allow connection, to recognize trust, and to guide with patience. One evening, Terran sat in the nursery wing, the hatchling curled beside him. He was tired but happy. The youngest dragon chirped softly and nudged his hand. Terran smiled. "You've learned a lot," he whispered. "And you're teaching more than you know." The hatchling chirped again, flicking its tail as if agreeing. The Emperor appeared at the doorway quietly. His wings were folded, his golden eyes soft but alert. He watched Terran and the hatchling for a long moment before speaking. "You have taught them patience," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And perhaps you have reminded me of it too." Terran looked up in surprise, then bowed slightly. "I am just a boy, Your Majesty," he said softly. "I only wanted to help." The Emperor stepped closer, crouching slightly to meet their level. "Help," he repeated. "Help is stronger than command when it is given freely. Strength is not always in fire or fear. Sometimes it is in understanding, patience, and trust." From that day, the Emperor allowed small gifts, gestures, and teaching moments in the palace. Hatchlings were encouraged to interact with humans carefully, and humans were encouraged to act with respect and patience. The palace, once cold and unyielding, became a place of learning, curiosity, and cooperation. Other dragons took notice. Those who had once flown through the skies demanding fear now observed humans with curiosity, learning that cooperation could be more powerful than dominance. Across worlds, humans began to see dragons in a new light, not merely as powerful forces to be tamed or feared, but as beings capable of trust, learning, and understanding. The legacy of that small silver hatchling in the human boy spread further than anyone expected. Temples, schools, and academies opened on distant planets to teach patience, observation, and kindness alongside strength and skill. Leaders began to see that fear was not the only path to obedience or respect. And in the Emperor's palace, the silver hatchling grew into a strong, confident dragon, never forgetting the lessons of trust learned beside a small human boy. One morning the Emperor walked through the nursery, golden eyes on the growing dragons. Terran followed him quietly, holding a small puzzle in his hands. The hatchlings chirped and flapped, exploring the halls. The Emperor extended a claw, gently nudging a stone Terran had placed for the dragons. No fire, no fear, only calm. Only trust. The Emperor spoke quietly to Terran. You have changed more than this palace, he said. You have changed the way we understand strength. Never forget this. Terran smiled humbly. I have only shown what I knew, he said. The rest was theirs to learn. The Emperor nodded. Across the palace, in the warmth of sunlight and trust, humans and dragons alike explored, learned, and grew together. Strength had a new meaning now, one of understanding, patience, and kindness. And for centuries to come, the story of a human boy, a silver hatchling, and a dragon emperor who finally accepted a gift would be remembered across worlds. It would serve as a reminder that courage, patience, and kindness could touch even the untouchable, and that true power lay not in fear or fire, but in trust and understanding. The palace no longer felt cold. The halls echoed with chirps, laughter, and quiet conversation. The Dragon Emperor, once untouchable, walked among his hatchlings and humans alike, strong, wise, and changed forever. And in every gesture of care, every small act of patience, the legacy of understanding grew, spreading across planets and generations, shaping a future where kindness was stronger than fear, and connection was the greatest power of all.